Okay everybody, today we're going to install the forged rods and pistons and assemble the whole bottom end. I'm going to show you how to do it, the torque specs and all that good stuff. What you're going to want to do is obviously get the piston rings on like I did in the previous video. And the important part is, if you look closely here, these piston rings have gaps. Well, you're going to want to stagger these gaps off, because if you don't, all the gaps face the same way, oil will shoot right past it and burn and cause smoke, and your car will look like you have a bad turbo or just look like a freight train. So you want to stagger them off. I always go in a cross, so like this. So there's a gap on that side, and then I put the gap on the complete opposite side from the compression ring, and these little ones here, I get them on the sides away from each other. And that's all you got to worry about with that. Now the next step is to remove the ARP bolts from the bottom, or factory bolts if you're doing it on a factory setup. Make sure, if you look closely, this one says 0101. It matches the 0101 on the actual rod. You do not want to get those wrong or backwards. Unless you had the rods resized that way, don't do it that way. You'll take this apart and then we'll get this in the cylinder. But before we do all that, we're going to lube up the piston ring compressor with a little bit of motor oil, a little bit of 5W30. That's what I use in the motor, so that's what I'm going to use on the assembly. You do not use assembly lube at all when installing piston rings. Basically, you're just going to lube it up nice so it slides real easy through there. Now carefully pull the piston out, make sure the rings are still where they were, and you're going to want to lube the cylinders. Just put some on your finger, lube it up like that, because you don't want it scratching those new cylinder walls up yet. And don't use WD-40 or anything else. Do not use assembly lube, because then these piston rings will never expand and you'll never get a seal. It's very important. I always just do the piston a little bit just because it is metal. It needs lube. And then, that ring wanted to pop out on me. So what we'll do is we'll get it pretty much in there. Don't go all the way in with it yet. Okay, now what we'll do is, you'll see there's a notch that's to tighten this right here. It's a pretty simple tool to use. You'll go ahead and slide it over. You might have to expand it out a little bit. Then make sure it's flush over the sleeves, like so. Then you'll go ahead and you'll tighten it up. A lot of people are using different piston ring compressors than I am. They have a newer style which work really good. This is a cheap one from AutoZone or O'Reilly's, and I think they work awesome, so I honestly would just use these if you can. Gotta make sure we get that just right. Nope, too far. Sometimes it's a pain. You're going to want to look. We could change this as long as the crank wasn't in. There's an arrow. It points towards the timing belt area. This is cylinder 4, this is cylinder 1. Timing belt goes over here. The arrow must face the timing belt. It's just an important thing you should probably remember. Now that you got it in, make sure it's all flush. While holding it down, lightly tap, and that's it. You do that 3 more times. Alright, there she is. All ready to go, all cleaned up. Everything's torqued to spec. The only thing I gotta do now is put the clutch, flywheel, and the thermostat on. As you can see in the back, I made a T-piece because I didn't want to wait on eBay shipping. This T-piece right here was like $6 with, I don't remember exactly the size. Whatever size this oil sensor is, you take the oil sensor with you and thread it in, and if it threads in, that's the one you get. You can just make your own T-piece for like $6, maybe 8, I don't know, because there's another little piece that goes into the block. Custom made T-piece. I gotta bolt this down. I usually run a hose from here to a catch can because that's excess crank pressure. You don't want that, especially boosted. But now all we got left to do is put the block guard in, which is, it's not here yet. It should be here within the next few days. The block guard and the ARP head studs, and she's drivable. But I'm gonna go ahead and set her in the car, and I can do all the block guard and head studs with it in the engine bay, because I can actually duct tape or painter's tape over all these cylinders so no metal shavings get down there, because I think we have to grind out a little bit to get the block guard to fit perfect. But that's not too big of a deal because I can always flush the system out so that there's no metal shavings in the coolant. Just make sure not to get any metal shavings in the actual cylinders. Make sure these cylinders stay tip-top shape. Alright guys, that's it. Bottom end's fully done. Even got my return line. Everything's taken care of, sealed up. It's ready to roll. Just waiting on 2 parts left and it'll be running. Of course there'll be a video of that running, and I will show you how to install the head because it's actually a subscriber's request on how to install and remove, basically remove and install the cylinder head. But I won't have a removal. I will have an install though, and it's basically the same thing, just reverse. Thanks for watching everybody. Like, subscribe, share, and stay tuned for more awesome videos. Okay, now after you're done putting all the pistons in, you get your bearings. These are some King bearings from eBay. They've always gave me good luck. Even with my EF build, it's this same motor. I've used these without any issues. This is just assembly lube from O'Reilly's or AutoZone. It works pretty good too. I usually use Lucas, but I'm out. This stuff works just as good. And then your thrust washers. So what we'll do is we'll flip it over, and I'll show you how to install these bearings. Really important, real quick. These are 2 different sizes. Basically, you're going to want both of the longer ones in the middle. And I'm pretty sure if you were building the car from the ground up and you've done this for your first time and you just need some instruction, what I always do is, you can see there's yellow on these ones because they're the longer ones. All the other ones are shorter. All the other ones go off to the sides and these 2 go in the middle. Okay, now that you remember that, take them all out. Doesn't matter what order they come out, whatever. Put them off somewhere where they're not going to get dirty. And then these don't like to pull up real easy. So what I always do is I tap on them while pulling up, and they come right off. And as you can see, I had these notched. I actually notched these with a grinder. That's about all the notching really needs. You just take a grinder in there and grind it off like that, or a Dremel or whatever you can afford. Okay, now with that off to the side, I'm going to pull these up a little bit. Don't go too far with them. I still have my old bearings in there just so I could keep a track of them. Now, it's also a really good thing to do is whenever you get these pistons and rods, whether they're new or you're just rebuilding, take all 4 of them and make sure you get them resized or have them checked for out of round. Because if they're out of round, your bearing's spun in there and it'll knock as soon as you start it up, basically. But you can see these ones have been machined already, so we don't have to worry about that. And also get the block line honed. They basically put the main cap cover back on and they hone all of the main cap bearings. Since the main cap's the easiest one to do, we'll start with the main cap. Pull all the bearings out and carefully, very carefully, don't get any dirt in these. Try not to. Take these main bearings and there's a notch. If you look closely here, there's a notch in there, and those go into the notch. Just like so. You do that to all of them and on the main cap itself. Okay, now that we got that done, you're going to want to do the thrust washers. You can't forget these. When you push the clutch in, your crankshaft likes to move. These thrust washers hold your crankshaft still, so when you push the clutch in, it doesn't move. Because while moving under high RPM, you can easily break rods and pistons and, well, let's just say it'd be a bad day. There's actually quite a few car companies that had to recall on this problem. Mitsubishi, I think, was one of them. Don't quote me on that. I'm not sure. So what you're going to do now is you're going to take your assembly lube. This is the easiest way to do it. Put some on the back of the thrust washer. And the flat side that has no markings, like this has markings on it, that's the back side. Basically, I do it like this, so they both get about the same amount. And in here you'll see, you can just stick them right there. They usually stick with the assembly lube on them. Sometimes they don't. These ones want to move. And there's that. Now, you'll put a little bit of assembly lube on these bearings. And that's basically all you do to get the assembly lube on them. Make sure it's nice and lubed up. Now we'll work on the rod bearings. Same thing, just like the main bearings. Now, you want to put the assembly lube on the bearings. I do have a little bit of Lucas assembly lube left, and I will be using it because it stays in the bearings better than just normal assembly lube. So I will be using a bit of it. Now, make sure your crank was taken to the machine shop and you had all the journals polished, because if you don't, you'll just have another rod knock right down the road. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to clean the journals up, just make sure there's no dirt on them. You're going to want to make sure this snout here, where the crank pulley goes, you want to make sure it's facing away from the engine stand, because you can install them backwards. I found out one day because I'm an idiot. It was like my second time building a motor, and let's just say I felt real stupid after I assembled the whole motor. It just wasn't right. So what we'll do is these two go down, and I'm going to put something in there to hold them because you can see they like to move, but I'll try to level this out so they stay up. Now what you're going to do is you're going to make sure the numbers, this is the 1010, you're going to make sure those are facing the back where the oil filter is. They'll match up with the rod, but we're going to make sure the numbers match up with the rod and the rod cap, the actual cap. I'm going to go get a light real quick. We're going to start at 20 pounds, and I'm going to look the specs up to be 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure it's like 42 to 47 pounds for the ARP stud low end bolts. but I'm going to put them at 20, just kind of pre-torque them so I can turn the crankshaft. Don't over torque these, you'll have a bad rod bearing, it'll start knocking. Just make sure you get the torque set right. If you don't know how to use one of these, educate yourself before you do it, because you can screw crap up really easy. Torque them to 43 foot-pounds. I just looked up the specs and it did say 43 for the ARP 3/8 bolts. Once you hear the click, you're good. You don't want to overdo it, like I said. That's it. As you can see how it moves pretty freely. Don't forget about these thrust washers, just make sure they don't come out. We're going to put the main cap on real quick, and then we have a torque sequence that we have to do to torque them properly. And there's not a lot of information or videos that I've seen of how to properly torque them. So I'll do that real quick. Remember, the yellow bolts go up top. I always make sure there's a little bit of motor oil or something on the threads. It kind of helps make them go in a little easier. Just make sure there's no dirt in them. Okay, that wasn't the torque sequence. Now, we're going to torque it down. This doesn't have any torque to it at all. So we're going to torque these down exactly how the factory recommends doing it so that you get a cross pattern. This one, you're going to want to do 18 pounds the first time around, and then on the second pass you'll do 38, and you'll do that 2 more times. So the first pass will go click, and then you'll go down here, that's number 2, click, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Now the second pass is 38. Now after you've done that, put a little more resistance on the crankshaft. Just spin it a few times. Make sure everything's good and solid. Make sure there's no slop or play. There will be a little play from left to right in almost any setup. This one doesn't have any right now. But after it's worn, it'll have a little left to right play. That's normal. Up and down is not good. We'll assemble the oil pan and the main rear main seal. That's very important to get the rear main seal nice, and replace it if you can. But make sure every time you do a rebuild, brand new oil pump. You can go cheap, you can go OEM. It doesn't matter what you get as long as it works, because reusing an oil pump could just make the problem worse. So always get a new oil pump. Put it on. I use gasket sealer to seal everything around on. And then on the oil pan gasket, it has a gasket and then I use the sealer. I don't like leaks. And with running full synthetic T6 Rotella, I want to make sure that I don't have a single leak in this motor. But we'll go ahead and do that, and then the motor's finished.